Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Mr. Howlietzer. I've got three stories for you coming up. They are Till Cold and Hunger Ceases, Shadow Puppets, and Steady as She Goes. Um, I've been really enjoying writing these lately. I hope all of you have been enjoying listening to them. Um, Couple of things, if you enjoy what I've got so far on the channel, please like and subscribe. It would really help me a lot in knowing what it is that you like. Please comment, give me any ideas that you'd like me to write about. Um, I've been writing for a long time and I really enjoy it. I've actually got a couple books on Amazon. I'll probably shout those out in the outro. So without further ado, please enjoy my next three stories that I have for you. Thanks. Bye. Till Cold and Hunger Ceases. Thomas smiled as he entered the stage to applause. The theater was packed, sold-out show. He never believed he could make it this far. In 4 weeks, he went from slumming in the subway to playing in Carnegie Hall, and it was all thanks to Stravinsky. He opened the case on the stool in front of the microphone as the crowd hushed in anticipation. He pulled Stravinsky out of his case and closed his eyes, melding with the violin spirit, ready to move and press as was necessary. Stravinsky possessed him every time they played. Often, Thomas had no memory of the concert. He would always wake up to the audience cheering and clapping, take a bow, and put Stravinsky away. He didn't even remember anything when Archie discovered him on the subway, nor did he remember how Stravinsky showed up. All he remembered was a dream. As he tried to sleep in the underground, struggling with cold and hunger, a voice came to him and asked him, "What would you give to live a better life?" And Thomas answered, "Everything. I would give everything to not feel cold and hunger ever again." And he woke up with a curious box beside him. Thomas had left Pennsylvania 3 years prior to pursue an acting career. He'd always wanted to be in the movies, go on talk shows, and meet extraordinary people. He wasn't very good at acting, though. He always said, "I'll figure it out when I get there." His parents had given him a large amount of money to follow his dream. But Thomas spent it quickly and ended up paying the price of living in the underground. He didn't want to go back home. He didn't want to face his parents, who would only tell him, "We told you so." He tried to stay in the know about acting jobs, but it was getting harder and harder to do. No one wanted to talk to a homeless man who hadn't shaved or washed in a month, and he couldn't convince them that he was a star that would pay them back if they gave him a chance. But here he was, finally making a name for himself, alongside Stravinsky. He was planning on calling his parents soon and proving to them he was doing fine. Even if it took 3 years and 4 months, he'd made it. He woke up. Stravinsky released its grip on him, and the audience was silent. Confused, Thomas looked out to see that they were all dead, dehydrated, like a bunch of mummies. Their ritzy clothes clung to them, still bright and new, but adorned tight, sun-dried husks of horror. Thomas gasped and nearly fell over. The weight of Stravinsky increased immensely, and Thomas lost his grip. With a clatter, Stravinsky tumbled onto the stage and shattered, revealing a pitch-black creature. It was serpent-like, but had long arms with very long claws. Like lightning, it seized Thomas, pouncing before he could get back to his feet. "Remember, you said you would give everything to stop the cold and hunger. I'll keep that promise." It ripped his mouth open, breaking the jaw, and crawled down his throat. Shadow Puppets. Tanya watched the shadows dance on the ceiling as she tried to sleep that night. They were cast from the trees outside her window, provided by the moonlight, and, thanks to the ceiling fan, dancing. The overlap of branches and stems appeared like two lovers waltzing across her ceiling. She laughed softly, because as soon as she thought it, they appeared more and more like tiny people, twisting and turning with the blades of the fan. She held her breath. It was uncanny. They didn't look like branches. They were the shadows of two people. She burst from her bed and peered out the window. She didn't really expect anything. Or rather, she didn't know what she expected. Something to validate the dancing shadows on her ceiling? But along the empty street and the empty sidewalk that circled the cul-de-sac of Kepling Drive, there was nothing. She turned back to the ceiling, and the little man and woman were branches again, flickering with the fan blades. She slid back into bed and stared back at the ceiling, the branches bouncing with the fan, and she concentrated hard, waiting for them to transform into people she saw moments ago. But they didn't. Instead, they morphed thicker and thicker, till they were just blackness. But as suddenly as they engulfed her ceiling, they became minuscule lines that waved at her. She felt a bit ill at the sudden change, and blinked profusely to stop her head from spinning. Normal. Everything was normal. She closed her eyes and shifted in her bed. Hello? She opened her eyes and turned. Something had just whispered in her ear. It sounded raspy and old, weak and almost inaudible. But it was uncanny. She looked back up at the shadows on her ceiling and gasped. She would have screamed if the gasp hadn't petrified her lungs. On the ceiling was a face. Do you like moving pictures? Tanya couldn't speak. She definitely heard that. She just stared at the ceiling, where the face became the little man and woman again, dancing. Nothing sinister, just as before. You can make them dance too. You can make them do whatever you want. Go on, try it. Suffice it to say, Tanya was terrified. What was talking to her? And it wanted her to try shadow puppetry? At 11 p.m.? She had school in the morning. She relaxed a little. The voice, though unfamiliar and rough, didn't sound like a bad voice, almost like Grandpa. She focused on the dancing lovers and morphed them into dinosaurs, roaming her ceiling. Then she changed them into astronauts, tethered to a space station. Then to her parents, scolding her and sending her to her room without dessert. She frowned at that. She had been doing her best not to think about it. But it had happened. She had come home with less than a perfect score on her algebra test, and her father was disappointed in her. Did that happen today? Tanya meekly spoke. Yeah. I'm still kinda mad about it. She'd done her best. Sure, she hadn't really studied that much, but he didn't have to yell at her so much. Her shadow father repeated what her father said before. You're better than this. You must work harder if you want to get anywhere in this world. Do you want to be a loser? Tears were welling up and sliding down her pillow. I'm sure you did your best. She did. She really had done her best. Is there anything that I can help you with? The shadows changed to her father getting beaten up by two other shadows. And as she watched them punch and kick her father, two shadowy figures emerged from the corners of her room, featureless, just large, dark, human-like shapes. She didn't want to beat up her father. She just wanted to sleep and forget about it. He'll do it again if you don't take back your power, Tanya. She felt the malice emanating from the shadow men. They seemed angrier than she was at the scolding, and the feelings of shame and guilt spread upon her like an infection. Her anger grew, and she got out of bed. She should express exactly how she felt to her father. How dare he make her feel this way? It was one test, and she did as good as she could have. The shadow man closest to the door opened it and allowed Tanya to pass through, immediately following her with the other close behind. It was quiet for a moment, until Tanya and the shadows entered her parents' room. Steady as she goes. Bartholomew wiped his brow as he looked at his dead wife lying in their bed. He couldn't bear her lying in the ground, not alone. They were supposed to live happily ever after. He folded her arms across her body. He didn't know what to do. This was his first time. He looked at the book once more, studying the picture on the opposite side of the ritual. It was a picture of a maiden laying down the same way, same position. He didn't know if it would matter, but he didn't want to mess this up. Perhaps it would have been better to practice on some butchered animals first, but the longer she stayed in the grave, the more she would deteriorate. No, he had to do it quickly, but also accurately. He reread the ritual. A lot of blood was needed. His blood. Necromancy demanded sacrifice, as all magic did. And in this case, as the one who cared for her the most, the book was explicit about this. He needed to measure out 1.25 liters of blood. He had the measuring vials. He had the tourniquet and needle. Let's get this rolling. He applied the tourniquet and found a vein, sticking the needle as best he could. It was very difficult. He was sure he missed. Or maybe he just wasn't doing it right. But still, the blood poured out, and he exhausted his body into several vials, measuring 1.25 liters. Shit. He stumbled around the bed as he bandaged his arm. He was going to need a doctor to make sure he wasn't infected. He did his best to sterilize everything, but he wasn't confident in his ability, nor was he confident in raising the dead. She looked so peaceful lying there, asleep, dreaming. What about? He wondered. He shook his head. No time for sentiment. I must do it now. The vials were to be drained into her mouth. She was to taste life and live again, as the book described. All the while he chanted a sacred script. Oh shit, the chrysanthemums. He nearly toppled over. The blood loss was getting to him, his head pounding. He had left the bag by the bedroom door. He crawled to it and dragged it towards the bed and gradually pushed himself back to his feet. Steady as she goes. He teetered momentarily, till he regained his focus upon her face. He smiled and pulled out the chrysanthemums, laying the blooms around her body, etching her silhouette onto the bedspread, a princess in the moonlight. He glanced at the window. The moon was full, one of the main reasons it had to be tonight. No mistakes. All perfect. Steady yourself, old chap. He pulled the curtains wide and tied them away to let the fresh moonlight in. He opened the window and let the cool fall air. Autumn was her favorite. She loved the crisp chill and the bundling up in her sweater and mittens. He smiled at the thought and stared longingly at his beautiful bride. Picturesque, she was, lying amongst the flowers, pale as the incoming light, but he imagined her rosy cheeks as he kissed them, her sparkling eyes as she playfully pushed him away. He set to work. He pulled the bed closer to the window. It would work better closer to the light. Oh, of course. He forgot the power circle. He measured out the best position in front of the window and drew the circle with the red chalk. A pentagram in the center with sigils in and around the points. He checked his work and moved the bed on top of the circle, her face aglow from the moon. He sighed. The candles. The candles had to be just right. He followed the picture and lit them, one by one, muttering the prayer that went with each one around the circle, 5 in all. Bartholomew was exhausted, and he was having a hard time standing. It was worth it. He poured the vials down her throat and read the sacred rites. He could feel it. There was something in the air, igniting, sparks prickling his skin like a million pinpricks tapping him. It was quiet, and then a howling gust of wind blew into the room, pushing him up against the opposite wall, forcing his eyes shut. The candles blew out, and the wind stopped. "Bart?" came a voice near the window. "Where are you, Bart?" "Belinda!" He opened his eyes to see her standing in the moonlight, wiping a bit of blood off her lips. What is the meaning of this?" She stared at him, a princess in the moonlight. He approached her. "I brought you back, darling. I couldn't bear your death. I was mad with grief, Belinda." He wrapped his arms around her and squeezed her tight, kissing her forehead and cheeks, waiting for her inevitable scarlet to cross her face. But it didn't. Her stomach growled, a deep and hollow sound, and her eyes looked at him with a hunger and lust that he had never seen before. Her mouth agape, darkness inside. Her jaw unhinged with a snap, and she buried her teeth into his shoulder, ripping his shirt off. Bartholomew screamed. Belinda silenced it with her elongated, claw-like fingers wrapping around his throat, until all that was heard was a gurgling sputter. Well, ladies and gentlemen, those were my 3 stories for the week. I've actually got another story coming out on Friday, so I tricked you. I've got another one coming out on Friday. It's called The Psychic Society. It's something I've been working on for years, off and on, um, along with my other fiction. Um, if you are interested, I've got 2 books on Amazon: The Mothman Reborn, which is a comic book, and How to Make a Monster, the Slenderfoot story, which is a novella. So those are on Amazon. If you look them up by name, or if you want to look it up by my author name, which isn't Mr. Howlietzer, but that will probably be changing soon. If you just look up Hatlaban, you'll get a chance to see who the real me is, or rather my real name. Um, anyways, take care. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe, and comment below anything you'd like to see or hear, any ideas you have for stories. Let me know. Thanks.